Well, my friend, sometimes you talk about a pioneer in the industry. Sometimes you talk about someone who has redefined the category that their business is in. Sometimes you talk about someone who walks the talks the talk, full integrity, does what he does for himself, and he does what he does for his clients. And we're doing all of that today. Mr. Tom Schwab of InterviewValet.com. Welcome to the show.
David, I am thrilled to be here.
So this is, I'm just very conscious of not screwing this up because of course, a podcast industry veteran, it's like, is he going to make sure that I look good? Is this going to be like a marketable podcast? So we're going to go right into dessert. We're going to eat dessert first because obviously there are a lot of these podcast guesting services that have popped up, and you have redefined the category that Interview Valet operates in. And right on the homepage, when people go there, they will see go beyond guesting, drive results with podcast interview marketing. Tell us, please, about podcast interview marketing, and we'll go from there.
Well, you understand this, David, right? Because you understand that the goal is not just activity, it's results. And too often people have been talking about podcast guesting. And even when we started back in 2016, right, 9 years ago now, people were talking about, oh, how do I get on a podcast? That's not the goal. The goal is, how do I get heard by the right people? What do I do to move them from being a passive listener to an active visitor to an engaged lead? What can I do to make the sales process easier, faster, for a higher level? All of that is marketing. And that's what we talk about, is podcast interview marketing. And the analogy that I often use is, you wouldn't go outside today and talk to a tree and say, well, I did public speaking, and you know what? It doesn't work. Well, yes, that you spoke in public, but there's more to it than that. And so often I hear business owners with great things to say and great businesses, and they say, well, podcast guesting doesn't work. And I'm like, podcast guesting is a portion of podcast interview marketing. So why don't you try the entire recipe? Because after 9 years, I have no doubt that it works. I know that podcast interview marketing works. Podcast interview marketing-ish, I don't know. You're taking your chances on that one.
Yes. Well, we're going to circle back to all of that. Please take a moment. Tell us the Tom Schwab story. Give us all of the professional journey that brought you to the work that you're doing today, and what were some interesting pit stops along the way?
It only makes sense in the rearview mirror. So I graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis, right? So if you were in the States, thank you for paying for my education. I was an engineer. I ran nuclear power plants. Then I went to corporate America, and everybody's going, well, how does that work together, right? And I look at the world as an engineer, right? And often people will say, well, you don't understand my business. It's too complicated. Well, it's just that you don't understand the business. Nuclear power, they have people safely running nuclear power plants in the Navy, and most of them are high school educated. They're very smart, very skilled, but you don't have to have PhDs doing that. And I think too often as business owners, we don't understand it, so we can't systematize it. We can't scale it. The other thing is that when people say, well, I don't understand how it works, or it's all a mystery. Well, if you have the process like an engineer and know the numbers, you can reproduce it. You can see what's working and what doesn't work. So I worked in corporate America for a while. I sold out for medical devices. And then I started my own company, and it was HubSpot's first e-commerce case study. We grew it from a regional player to a national leader, sold it off. Early on, I called HubSpot and said, hey, do you think you could use this for e-commerce? And they said, yeah, I think it should work. Let's give it a try. So sold that company off. And then David, when I was in my sabbatical period, I called it, I was in a mastermind and some friends said, well, how did you grow your last company? I said, we did it all with guest blogs. But this was 2014 and guest blogging didn't work at that time. So I hypothesized, I bet you could take podcast interviews and use those like guest blogs. Get that know, like, and trust, get the SEO value. We tested it. It worked really well. I did a cheesy little PDF that I was giving away. I did a course that I never took out of beta because my friends were telling me, right, I want to be the guest. You take care of all the rest. So I started an agency. One of our early customers bought the name Interview Valet. They bought the domain and they gave it to me on there. And for the first few years, people would go, what's a podcast? And then really about 2019, it really started to take off. And it was good because it gave us the foundation to actually understand the systems, the processes, and get us to where we are today.
So what was your, I'm curious, go back to that mastermind conversation because guest blogging had sort of run its course by
Mhm.
2014. And there was a lot of noise in there. And podcasting, even though it was big, it was nowhere near as big as it was going to get from 2016 through to today. What was the conversation in that mastermind setting that said, Tom, podcasting is it? And then prior to that, what was your, besides, obviously the guest blogging, what was your previous exposure to podcasting also?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything new in the world, right? There's nothing revolutionary. It's all evolutionary.
Yeah.
And as I looked back on it, what I was doing with guest blogging was just tapping into an existing audience, right? It's the same thing my grandfather did when he would speak at, the Chamber of Commerce or, the Rotary Club, tapping into existing audiences. And so I looked at it as like, well, it used to be as seen on TV, as seen on radio, on blogs. This is sort of the next thing. And
Yeah.
I was listening to podcasts. I knew a lot of my friends were, and I thought, this seems like it's an easy way to get the message out there. And the other
Yeah.
thing too, David, I'm always amazed when I see you speaking on stage, right? It is a talent to get up there and present on stage. When I started out, I was fearful of even speaking on a podcast. And I think for many people, it's an easy step, especially when it used to just be audio.
Yeah.
For introverts, they can do public speaking on a podcast. And then after COVID, we're all so comfortable on Zoom calls that I think it's less intimidating for a lot of people. So in some ways, I looked at it as not only will this work, but will this work for me?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk a little bit. We'll talk a little shop here. When you say that you can, control the context, control the conversation, get some SEO juice from this, it's the gift that keeps on giving as far as driving people to your website, to your email list, your lead magnet, and so forth. Uh, a guest who might be fairly new to all of this, and they might come to you, Tom, and say, Tom, let's say I have a brand new book or I'm launching a new business and I want to gain visibility and I want to gain credibility. Are, are some of your folks not even thinking about list building, SEO, lead magnets? How much education needs to happen? And then what is the buffet table that you lay out in front of them as far as what's possible?
Yeah, and most people come with one objective being on the podcast, right? Like you said, I want visibility, I want thought leadership, I want better leads that close faster, right? All of those things you can do off of podcast, but they don't realize that there's so many more, right? If you've got your own podcast, the best place to find podcast listeners is listening to a podcast. We do lots of nonfiction book tours. It's a great way to, like you said, get that SEO from the backlinks. There's so many things that you can get from a podcast interview, but you have to start with the objective. Once again,
Yeah.
we talked about the goal is not podcast guesting. It's really, what do you want to accomplish from this? Who do you want to talk to? And really, what do they want to do? Right? What you want them to do afterwards?
Yeah.
What's the goal? And then how can you use that content to repurpose it and put it up on social media? Often we'll see people that just want to do the activity because they've heard of it, right? Oh, I want to do podcast guesting. I want to do public speaking. I should do more social media. Well, those are all activities, but how are they fitting in to your overall marketing, right?
Yeah.
And as you teach, right, it's marketing is the plan, it's the strategy, not just a dozen different tactics that are busy work but don't move the needle.
Yes. Yes, for sure. Amen. Well, let's talk about getting a guest podcast ready, because I'm sure that and again, it might not be the entrepreneurial side of things, but more the corporate side, the CEOs, the folks that maybe have a new program or a new product. A lot of people, I think, if they're brand new, right, babe in the woods, they say, I'm going to get on as many podcasts as I can and talk about my stuff, talk about my product, talk about my program, talk about my book, talk about my company. And, as a host, I'm sure you get a ton of pitches. It's interesting because, of course, you're in the guesting business, the interview guest marketing business. I get a ton of pitches. The ones that scream out, me, 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 are very easy to delete. So there must be some coaching or some guidance that you give your guests. Here's what's going to appeal to hosts, and here's what's not. And maybe they even show you their current pitch, or they show you their current podcast one sheet, and you go, oh, that's why it's not working. It's because you totally have not packaged yourself as an appealing guest. Give us a couple before and after principles
And
of, you know, good guest packaging versus not so good guest packaging.
yeah, and I'll give a couple examples here. One would be like you said, I'm launching this. I want to talk about my book, my product. And you've seen these pitches, right, David, that come to you. Dear David, I hope this day finds you well. I just wrote a new book on midwifing, and I
Yeah.
want to be on your podcast. There is no connection there. It's all about me, me, me. And I remember years ago, somebody told me we're all selling Preparation H, right? Preparation H is hemorrhoid cream. Nobody cares about your product or service. They care about their pain in the rear end. So always focus it on that. Focus on what is the problem you're solving, because that's what people want to know about, right?
Yeah.
And if you can define that problem, they assume that you can define the solution. And you should always be talking about what's in it for them. So
Yeah.
we always take that and rephrase it. The other
Yeah.
thing is that we've got a lot of people that come to us that are corporate trained. They've got media training,
Yeah.
and they show up to a podcast with a 10-page media kit, right? Most podcast hosts are not trained journalists. If
Yeah.
you give them a 10-page media kit, they are looking at it on their phone, and it's 9 pages to say no to.
Yeah.
So boil it down there into a one page. And you'd mentioned that. And if you want to see what a one page looks like, I'll put that up on our website here. But it's not supposed to look incredibly sexy or artistic. It's supposed to be the information they need.
Yeah.
Who is David, right? A quick bio. Give me a third person rip and read introduction.
Yeah.
Make it easy for them. The other thing is interview topics. Don't give them interview questions. It can be insulting, right? If I met you for the first time and said, David, so nice to meet you, ask me these 10 questions.
Yeah.
And if you do, it sounds stupid there. So give them interview topics that would be insightful and interesting to their audience. The other thing is remember what medium you are. This is not television or radio. This is podcasting, and it has a longer lifetime. So make sure it's timely and it's timeless. So whatever you're talking about here, especially we have to talk to people who are in AI, And we work with a lot of those people right now.
Yeah.
Don't mention the tools, because in 30 days, when the episode comes out, that tool is going to be superseded by a free one. Talk
Yeah.
about the big picture things.
Yeah.
So that is one to reframe the what you're talking about, right? Always remember you're selling preparation H.
Yeah.
The other one is we have worked with some great people that are media trained, and some of them are so media trained that they can answer any question perfectly in 30 to 45 seconds. And I think of one was a cybersecurity analyst on one of the big television networks. He's probably on there 3 or 4 times a week. And I had to reach back to him and say, Morgan, you're killing the host. This is a 30 or 45-minute podcast. You have to tell stories. And that he admitted that, and he's like, he got to love that part of podcasting because it got people to know and like him. It wasn't just, here's somebody that I see for 3 minutes, the host talks for a minute and a half, and he talks for a minute and a half. And
Yeah.
then finally, I see so many people that have great discussions. Right? It's a great topic, a great conversation. But what is the next step? What are you doing this for? This isn't just entertainment, not for you or for the audience. There has to be some action, some next steps with that.
Yeah.
So make sure you make it clear to people how they can take that next step with you, where you should go. I don't care how good of a presenter you are, you cannot change everybody's life in 30 or 45 minutes. Give them the place to go next. And we can talk about that later. We've done a lot of studying around this to send them to one welcome page that is an evergreen page for evergreen traffic. That has always proved the best way to attribute the traffic, but also to convert the traffic.
And when you say convert the traffic, that is opting into a list, getting some sort of engagement with that person, whether it's book a call, download a PDF, subscribe to our podcast, right? Because some guests also are hosts. And having to, I'm guessing, and when we can talk about it now. I'm guessing there's going to be something on that page for people who are in the slow lane and very casual, people who are in kind of the fast lane and are ready to maybe raise their hand for something, and then people who are hot and who are ready to buy, and they just heard you on the show. They happen to be looking for exactly that kind of product or program or service. And they're like, oh my gosh, this sounds like exactly what I need. How do I give you money? And those people are in kind of like the super fast lane. What is on that page, and how do we accommodate all three kinds of prospects?
You're dead on with that, David. You want to meet people where they are. And so often people will say one call to action, right? Digital marketers know you only have one call to action. Well, send them to one place, and we call it a welcome page, right? And if you want to see an example of it, just go to interviewvalet.com/selling show. So first thing you're going to see that is the hero image, right? Which is the artwork from the podcast. And then there's some verbiage. You acknowledge the host, right? Because the host is the friend. You are coming to this podcast because you love David. It's not because I wonder who Tom Schwab is. No, you go there for the host. So acknowledge the host. And then you go through, that's where you put your picture, your social media, so that they can get in contact with you.
Yeah.
But then give them 3 ways to say yes. And just like you said, the slow lane, the medium lane, and the fast lane, I always call it the small yes, the medium yes, and the heck yes.
Right.
So the small yes is something small. It doesn't take them a lot of time or a lot of money, but it gets them back there. It could be a checklist, a personal assessment. It could be subscribing to your own show. The medium yes is something that's going to take them a little bit more time or a little bit more money, right? So that could be a tripwire product. It could be a video. It could be a book. It could be case studies. Some of those things that you couldn't show in a podcast interview. And then I love the fast lane, right? That heck yes. I always look at it, if you are the answer to prayer, right? And somebody hears you and they want to engage with you, right? Whales don't click, big fish don't swim through funnels. If they come with credit card in hand, wanting to buy, wanting to talk to the wizard, don't slow them down in a funnel. So that's typically a product or a discovery call, really whatever it is for your sales process there.
No.
And this is also the best way to attribute the traffic because I'll hear people say, you don't know where people came from on a podcast interview. Well, if you do it right, you do.
Right.
Almost like on selling on the stage. When you give them that QR code up there, if you do it correctly, you know everybody that hit that QR code was listening to me in this room.
Right.
And it's very important because podcasts are evergreen. And while if I send them to my homepage, that's going to change over the years.
Yeah.
Whereas this page, it's an evergreen page for evergreen traffic. And the other thing too, people will say, oh, it's like a squeeze page or a landing page. No, you want to put all of your navigation on there. If they come to your site and they want to look around, don't stop them from doing that, right? They already know you, so let them look around. And so, if you want to see it, it's not a secret on how it's done. Just look at that page that we set up for the selling show.
Totally tremendous. Really, so many great nuggets in there. Really, really great. I want to go back to because there's common wisdom, right? There's common knowledge, and then there's uncommon knowledge, aka the stuff that actually works. Just like you mentioned about one call to action, this is what reminded me. One call to action, and the answer is no, let's meet people where they are. Yes, there's one call to action with multiple channels on it so that people can respond appropriately. On the pitch, on the interview marketing document, right? The PDF or the email or however it comes, a lot of people say, well, I have one topic. This is my topic, and this is what I am pitching to the host. And you're saying multiple topics. Don't say, here are the questions to ask, saying, hey, here's the half dozen different topics that we could share with your audience. Tell us about what's the traditional wisdom of stay focused on one guest, one topic, one show versus, hey, here's a half dozen things I could talk to your audience about.
I've seen this on pitch sheets, and their topics are finance, entrepreneurship, leadership, marketing, sales, right?
That's the wrong kind.
What it's like, what do you want to talk about? Don't make me connect the dots. What you should really do with your topics is pick 5 topics that would be great for the selling show.
Yeah.
And not just how to sell better. Give them the entire title of the show, right? Go through the topics. Why podcast interviews convert 25% or 25 times higher than blogs.
Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting. Or, one could be why podcast guesting doesn't work.
Yeah.
That is something that is engaging. And if you think about it, it's all the same thing as writing blog topics. Right? Give them different topics. And when you start the interview, here's a little behind the scenes. Make sure you know where you're going with this. So before they hit record, ask them, what are you hoping to get out of this? Where do you want to go? Pick one topic and go deep with it, because that way you know where they're going. They know where you're going. It makes it much easier. And you don't want to do, I call Groundhog Days interviews, Groundhog's Day, right? Because you don't want every interview to sound the same. It gets boring for you. It gets boring for the audience, and you'll never be able to repurpose it because everyone sounds the same.
Yes. So good. Sometimes, so I want to go behind the scenes on the host's side, and you obviously host the show, so we can chit chat about this for a moment. What I love about here's 5 different topics in my head, because you never know, right? There's catchy headlines, and then there's really good, substantial conversation. You and I might have exhausted topic number 1 by the 10-minute mark. And then as a host, what I will, because I sometimes have the one sheet or the email open in front of me, and I will say, Tom, this has been so fantastic. Let's switch gears now for a quick second. I know one of the things, this is kind of a meta
Mhm.
conversation here, but we're going to do it for real. Tom, let's switch gears here for a moment. And I know one of the things that you like to share with your audiences is the mantra, forget outbound or inbound. The world is going to nearbound. Now, that is a bullet. Let's step out of that role play for a second.
Mhm.
That is a bullet on Tom's guest sheet. If we had exhausted, and of course, you can't really exhaust Tom Schwab's brain, so just to be clear on that, but if we had exhausted that topic from the host's chair, I love that I can now kind of task
Yes.
switch into a different aspect or a different vein or, you know, a new track on the same album, if you will. So I just love that a lot. But now that we're talking about it, Mr. Tom Schwab, tell me, forget outbound or inbound, the world is going to nearbound. Let's talk about that for a minute.
Well, my blood is HubSpot orange, right? You'll notice my logo is HubSpot orange. I was one of their early customers. They were one of my early customers. I believe in inbound. But what I'm seeing with AI is that content is becoming so much more prevalent. I heard somebody refer to it as we've gone from content is king to content is spam. And
Oh,
and it's true. And let me give you an example here, David. I'm a big inbound guy. So the other day we had a big storm, tree falls over in the driveway and it's laying on a power line. I don't touch it when it's on a power line. So what's the first thing that I do? I go online and I put something in there and I get all of these lists, right? Angie's list. And I just know if I click on one of these, my phone's going to ring for the next 2 weeks. Right. So I didn't know where to go. And my wife comes up and she goes, let me just put it in the Nextdoor app. Right. And it's just a community app. I'm not on it, but she put it in there. And within, I don't know, a half hour, she got 10 recommendations. 8 of the 10 were the same. So she went to her community to find the answer, and it was great. We put a review up there on that. And it struck me that we are doing the same thing now in business, right? You and I are both in a group together. And I'll forever go in that group and ask, hey, does anybody have any experience with this? Because I trust I don't know, 200 people in that group more than I do all
yeah,
of the posts on the internet.
yeah,
And the idea of Nearbound actually came through a book called by the same name of that, and talk about selling through partnerships. And I think the idea of Nearbound even comes into public speaking,
mm,
podcasting, um, influencer marketing, all of those things, right?
yeah,
Why am I here? It's because you control an audience that I want to be near, right?
yeah,
Why do you go on a stage and get in a plane and fly someplace? Because they're controlling an audience. And I think as we get more efficient at things that are getting less effective, Nearbound tapping in to that audience and that influencer can be so much more powerful. And so that's something that we're really focusing on. And I think it falls in well with podcast interview marketing because Nearbound, the influencer here is David Newman, right? You're such a well-known person. You're such a loyal following. You've written the books. I'm I'll admit this, right? I'm riding your coattails on authority here. And so that's really what we need to do because I don't think the authority of being the first thing on Google is as powerful as it once was, and
yeah,
especially if it's an ad, right? And with AI changing now, it really worries me. Is anybody ever going to go to the lists anymore? Are they just going to be like me and start asking Chat GPT these questions? And even people now are looking and saying, was this written by Chat GPT or is this authentic? And that's why I think, that authentic referrals, the authentic conversations we're having right here,
yeah.
people will hear me not speaking in complete sentences and they'll like, oh, that's not Chat GPT. That's got to be a human.
Yes, 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 yes. Uh, Boy, so much to dig into there. I want to come back to that human versus AI component, but the thought that just popped in my head, and you can tell because this is a completely disorganized mess. This couldn't possibly be Chat GPT. Let's talk about good guest behavior. So I think some podcast guests think that their responsibility begins the day that they're, the hour that they're being interviewed, and their responsibility, quote unquote, to themselves and to their marketing ends as soon as we say, "Oh, Tom, this was such a great interview. Thanks for being with us." Click, and the episode is over. Again, I'm putting my host hat on now. I love guests that promote ahead of time. So I'm going to have a whole different opinion of someone who I've laid eyes on for the first time when we turn on the podcast versus someone who tags me on X or Facebook or LinkedIn. "Hey, can't wait to be a guest on the Selling Show with @David Newman next week," right? "Watch for the episode, blah, 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 blah." I'm like, wow, that is so nice. They didn't have to do that. They gave me a plug before, right? They gave me a plug before the event. And then, of course, they're charming and wonderful on the podcast. And then here's what guests almost never do, and it's shocking to me. And I didn't used to do it either until I realized on the hosting side this would be nice. You ever send a thank you email? Just a very simple thank you email. It's like, "Hey, Tom, it was so great being on your show. Thank you for sharing your brilliant audience with me. I can't wait for the episode to come out." How hard would that be to send a very simple thank you email? And then the big kahuna is when the episode comes out. When the episode comes out, of course, the host is going to promote it, and you're counting on the host to promote it. Maybe the host has a bigger audience than you, or the same size or smaller, doesn't matter. But my feeling has always been, as a host, I am going to promote a guest more vigorously when I see them promoting their own episode. So a lot of people are just counting on me to amplify, magnify, put this out there in the world. Some people, regardless of their audience size, regardless of their follower size, I don't care if you got 17 people on Instagram. I don't care if you got 42 people on your LinkedIn. When I see you promote the episode, I'm going to promote your episode twice as hard. So talk to us a little bit about what's your philosophy on the guests, not just responsibility, because it's not really a responsibility, the great guest playbook for what people might consider doing before they're on a show, when they're on a show, and then after.
I think you have to look at it. Are you looking at this as a transaction or a relationship? Is this the one and done, or is this the start of something great?
Yes.
And I think the word guest, we just have to go back to that. Drop off the podcast, right? David, if you invited me to your home for dinner,
Yeah.
what would I do to be a good guest, right? I would acknowledge it. I would check in a few days before, a week before. I'm looking forward to this, just like you said on X, right? Just putting up a quick post out there, because the host is thinking, are they excited about this? Did they forget about this? Reassure them, right? You will have a much better interview if you warm it up that way. Give them all the information that they need and make sure you understand what the invitation is all about. Listen to the show, get the sense of it, right? And if going back to the dinner analogy, I want to know, is this black tie or is this barbecue outside? It makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Another thing is show up early, right? We always teach our clients there's early, on time, and rude, right? Early is like, don't jump on 10 minutes before because they could have something going on there.
Yeah.
But you had better be waiting in that Zoom room or the Riverside room at least 4 minutes beforehand, right? And anything else is just rude. When you're on there, be a gracious guest, right? This is not your show. Follow their lead. Use the podcast name, use their name, right? Why wouldn't you? That's who the audience is following. And bring value, right? I remember a podcast host, DJ Doug Sandler from Nice Guys on Business. He said, you don't have to promote yourself on the podcast interview. If you do a good job, the host will promote you more than you ever did, right? Say thank you afterwards. And how do you say thank you after dinner? Maybe you send them a gift, you send them a note. And that's something that we do for our clients, right? They can
Yeah.
sign up and we'll send them a thank you note to every host.
Yeah.
And it's not only the right thing to do, but you know what? It makes the interview get promoted so much more. And we've seen that.
Yeah.
When the interview goes live, why wouldn't you tag and share everything the host puts out there, but then put stuff out yourself? Because guess what? The host is going to repost that and comment on it. If you thought that their audience was so important to give up an hour of your time to talk to, why wouldn't you want to stay in front of them? So
Right.
you can get a month's worth of content from every interview. And I think that's the people that are getting the most from every interview. They're not doing more interviews, they're doing more with every interview. And,
Yes.
and David, let me throw on one that so many people forget about is just because you did the interview or it went live 6 months ago doesn't mean everyone has forgotten about it or that it's not applicable anymore. The best people are the ones that are promoting it for that first month. And then they do some of it for the first 6 months. And then they go and look back and say, if this one is doing really well, I'm going to continue promoting this.
Yeah.
And the funny part is that those are the people that you'll see the hosts reference when they'll start to go, yeah, this reminds me of an interview we had with Tom Schwab back on, interview 127, where we talked about
Yeah.
podcast guesting. You're staying top of mind with the host, and they're going to keep referencing you and your previous episode.
Yeah.
And it's really that whole idea. Is this the start of a relationship or is this a transaction?
Yeah.
One of them feels really good, right? Like this is going to be a
Yeah.
lifelong friendship. Uh, the other one feels like you were just used and abused. And
Yeah.
those people that do that actually hurt themselves. And, we've been doing this for 9 years. We've had clients come to us before and, we talk with them and then we come back and say, can we serve this person? And
Yeah.
sometimes that's going out to hosts and saying, what did you think? And I can think of one guest that did a churn and burn summer, right? So many podcasts, was there, gave the same interview, never followed up, never promoted. And we went back to the hosts and they said, I would never have them on again. And we had to tell them, no, you did so much damage
Mm.
that last time that you've messed up this entire channel. And they said, well, nobody told me, right? The agency I was working with, they just told me more is better. And I'm like, I'm sorry, it's not. Better
Yeah.
is better. And you caused a lot of damage there. Maybe, all I said is if you sent a lot of handwritten apology notes, it might do it. And, it was one of these where they were just focused on efficiency more and more and more.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you can get on a lot of podcasts, but not the ones that matter.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And then also not being invited back. So that's the other thing, right? When you have
Yeah.
a fantastic guest, and I know you and I are now approaching the end of our time, so we totally have to have you back. By the way, that's a phrase that you want to hear hosts say when you're on a show. Oh my gosh, Tom, this was so fantastic. We have to have you back. And I mean that genuinely, but on the meta level, the guests listening, you totally want to hear that. You totally want to engender that response that we totally have to have you back. And so we will have you back. Last topic for today, we talked about AI versus human. There are some fantastic AI tools that people can use to repurpose or segment or transcribe the podcasts that they're guests on and sort of atomize that content. And it's the gift that keeps on giving. Do you help people with the atomizing and repurposing also?
We do. We call it controlling the conversation. So first thing is you control the crowd you're talking to. You control the conversions, what they do after they hear you.
Yeah.
But controlling the conversation that happens afterwards, that is so powerful now, right?
Yeah.
You can get a month's worth of content out of every podcast interview. And you see people doing that, right? Gary Vaynerchuk, Alex Hormozy, they're repurposing, they're cutting it up. And most people think they have a content creation problem. We're all creating the same amount of content. It's a content capture problem and a content repurposing problem. And that's what we help with them with. And it's so amazing. My team will always say, if I talk for 45 minutes, they can get 2 minutes of brilliance out of that. And
Yeah.
so it's great. It doesn't take you as the owner, or as the brand of the company, any more time. You can take what you've already created, repurpose it, promote it out there. And it's just a wonderful way. And especially with podcasts today, some people listen to them on Facebook with the clips. Some people are on YouTube. It's all these different things. And so create in the way that's easiest for you, and then repurpose in the way that it's easiest for your ideal customers.
Love it, love it, love it. So I've got two questions as we're landing the plane here. The final question is, where can people go to get more Tom Schwab brilliance? But before that, if folks were to take one overarching concept from our conversation today about podcast interview marketing, what would you hope that overarching takeaway concept would be?
I hope it's the idea of relationships, right? How can you use this to build a relationship with an influencer, a micro influencer, someone that controls your audience, and look at this collaborative content that we're rebuilding here as the start of a relationship. It's that long-term relationship. It's never been easier to chase a transaction or harder to grow a business. And that's all about the relationship.
Oh, what a fantastic soundbite. Absolutely. Could not agree more. Tom, where can we send people? What link do we put in the show notes, or links, so folks can connect more with you and interview Valet?
Okay, this is pulling behind the curtain, right? So before we talked about the welcome page,
Yeah.
at the end of the podcast, when somebody says this, you say, "Oh, thank you, David, so much." You can go back to interviewvalet.com/selling show. And there's a special page there. And there's really 3 ways that we can help you. The first one is there's a quick assessment, right? 10 questions, podcast interview marketing assessment. Will it work for you? Now, I wrote a book. It's called Podcast Guest Profits: How to Grow Your Business with a Targeted Interview Strategy. It's on Amazon, but you can get a free copy right there. And then finally, if you listen to this and you thought, huh, I'd like to see how I could use this to build my brand, to build my business, I'd love to jump on a discovery call with you. My calendar will be there. So all of those things will be back at interviewvalet.com/selling show.
Excellent. Look at that. Perfectly delivered, 1000% on point. The man that walks the talk, talks the talk, walks the walk. You're doing the whole thing. So good, Tom Schwab. And we totally have to have you back. So we'll schedule that a little bit later once we turn off the microphones. My friend, you are a pioneer. You are, as my people say, a mensch in this business, one of the good guys out there doing great work for amazing clients. And I should also say, in full transparency, that I have been the recipient of several Interview Valet guest pitches, and 99% of them are pretty spot on, because your team does the research, your team does the relevance checking, your team does the due diligence to make sure that you're never wasting your guests' time, and you're certainly never wasting your host's time. And your team are one of the few, because I get pitched like literally 5 times a week on some crazy nonsense, sometimes totally irrelevant, sometimes just not in our wheelhouse, whatever. Interview Valet, as a recipient host, I will tell you, they don't bring you no junk. It's all the good stuff. So Tom, you've done an amazing job on all fronts with that. And I'm honored to call you a friend.
Thank you, David.